Welcome everyone. My name's Sam Hall. I'm the Director of the Conservative Environment Network. For those of you who don't know, CEN is the independent forum for conservators in the UK and around the world who support net zero, nature restoration and resource security. This evening's event is entitled How Can We Restore Nature to These Wild Isles? I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors for this event, National Trust, the RSPB and WWF. So the context for this discussion this evening, I think, is framed very well by last week's State of Nature report, showing a 19% decline in species since 1970, and that 1 in 6 species are at risk of extinction. And I think that's important to remember that nature is in decline, and there is this depressing and bleak backdrop to it. But I think what we're hopefully here tonight celebrating are some of the fragments of nature that do remain. And I think we're drawing inspiration from the BBC series Wild Isles, which put a spotlight on some of our amazing nature that we still have across these wild isles. And I hope that we can turn some of the marvel that we felt for some of that nature in the Wild Isle series into a desire and appetite for large-scale nature restoration across the UK. I want to hope we can get to in this panel session some practical steps that we can take to bring back biodiversity and to nature across the UK. And I also want to highlight at this stage our CEN campaign for today, Wildflower Power, which is putting a spotlight on the fact that we've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since the 1930s. And there are lots of things that government can do and is doing, like the Environmental Land Management Scheme, Biodiversity Net Gain. There's also a lot that individuals can do and that councils can do as well. And so we're talking about some of those things, from how people manage their gardens to how councillors manage their verges and their parks. So please do speak to some of the CEN team and visit our stand to hear more about some of those ideas. Just to briefly introduce the format for this event. So we're delighted to be joined by the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Thérèse Coffey, who's going to give us some initial remarks to frame our discussion. And then I think we'll take a few questions from members in the audience. Then we're going to see a short video clip from the Wild Isles series, summarising some of the key themes from that. And then we've got an excellent panel, which I'll introduce after the Secretary of State speech, to discuss some of what we've heard from the Secretary of State, and indeed discuss some of those potential ideas for how we can restore nature to these wild isles. Please do tweet along at CEN_HQ is our handle on Twitter or X. So please do promote the event on social media for us. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Thérèse Coffey.
Well, Sam, thank you for that introduction about why the Conservative Environment Network matters so much. And I love this wildflower power. It's great. Probably inspired by my garden, given I haven't given it that much attention more recently. But no, it's absolutely critical to understand about how nature is so important to everything that we do, our economy, in terms of we could not survive without thriving nature. And that is the key message, which I'm sure many of us want to remind us time and time again. So it is great to be here and to be supporting this discussion. I think I should declare an interest. I will register an interest. I am a member of the National Trust. I recognise the important work that you do for conservation, for nature, and indeed of many of our fine buildings around the country too. But I have to say, coming up to, it's a bit of a change from last year's conference when I was in a different role. But I'm delighted to be back at DEFRA, and I'm delighted to see on the panel today Theresa Villiers, who at one point actually was my Secretary of State when I was, perhaps a bit longer, but for about 6 weeks. But it was important that we have those people who are enthusiasts, and it's great to see Theresa, because I know you are an enthusiast for this and a doughty champion for nature and animal welfare as well. So in terms of, it certainly has been a busy year. I must admit, turning up to DEFRA, I walk in and the very first thing I get told is, you're going to break the law on Monday. It's like, great, why is that? Oh, we haven't done this thing, or we haven't done that. And so one of the things that's really important is, of course, I'm delighted that we then tabled the legislation to have these targets, but for me it's about delivery. And the targets are only as good as the action plans that you put into place. And that's why I'm proud that we have launched the Environmental Improvement Plan, why we've upgraded actually the Stormflow Action Plan, and why we've also got a plan for water. The agricultural transition plan is flowing out now. But coming back to nature, I think it's one of the things that also we've done in the last year is about things like the first 3 highly protected marine areas that we've designated. Other aspects about we're going to preserve sand eels. That will help our puffins and our bird population to feed, because it's all about making sure, and for nature to thrive is about the variety of things that the BES report said in 2019. But it is really about making sure that we have that habitat and get rid of the invasive species, the effects of pollution in more ways than one, but also in terms of how land gets used. And that's why later this year, there's quite a lot going to happen in Q4 of this year. We'll be publishing our land use framework, because it really matters about how this comes together and we have a symbiotic relationship between nature and the economy. Because frankly, without each other, they won't thrive and survive. And it's really important that we do that. But if I think back to the cold of Montreal last year, we're all heartened by the fact we managed to get that global biodiversity framework. It was fantastic. There was a lot of hard negotiation, and I'll give huge credit to our civil servants in DEFRA, because we held our nerve, reopened the text and made sure we got the best targets in there. But other countries trusted us, because they know that when we say that we're going to do something, we deliver. And it's why, in terms of getting the funding going for a global biodiversity fund, while Canada led the way by an early announcement, we made our first down payment, or committed to our first down payment, when we were at the Global Environment Assembly, GEF Assembly, and then Germany, when we were in the UN General Assembly last week, has now provided it so we can unlock that. And it's about making sure that we have that trust with countries around the world, that together we can really make nature restoration a genuine possibility by 2030. And that's what we need to strive towards with our 30 by 30. I have to say, for years, I've been to 4 COPs, I think, climate COPs. Honestly, nature's been the Cinderella, but finally, I feel nature is the Barbie and climate is becoming the Ken. And that's the way it should be. We need to make sure that nature is first. And, of course, symbiotic as well. But there's a number of different things that I think we will continue to be working on. While I was in New York and indeed in London last week, we had the launch of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. This is a massive element. You know, the F in the room is finance. And that is what we need to unlock. And it's good to see that GSK had already committed to doing this. So just like when I was at Secretary of State for DWP, where we regulated to make the carbon-related financial disclosures necessary for pension funds and the like, I'm going to try and twist Mel Stride's arm to see if we can do the same for nature as well. Of course, we've got this huge, ambitious Environment Act and all the targets in place. As I mentioned, we've already done a lot of plans. We are making, I think, good progress on the transition of agriculture. But fundamentally, be proud of actually you as a Conservative member, what our government has done. I defy anyone to see around the world who has done more for nature and climate. Be proud of that, and be proud it's been under a Conservative government. So, of course, conservation it's in our DNA, and that's why we'll continue to work in terms of beautiful places to live, to fundamentally care for nature. It's why the biodiversity net gain, it will be implemented, coming into effect from January, and we will be supporting green investment. We do need to unlock British innovation, and we'll continue to make sure we invest in local solutions and also critically nature-based solutions to some of the many challenges that we face. So with that, I'm delighted to, I'm so looking forward to the film. I must admit I have another speaking engagement afterwards, but Sam, you've agreed that I can take a couple of questions, and I've said I'm going to take them from members because journalists and NGOs get to talk to me other times anyway. So I'd be very happy to take any questions from members. Any member? Wow. Oh, yes. The gentleman from Huntingdon.
It's all right. Do I need it? All right, okay, we'll use the mic then. I noticed in your brief here you've mentioned Sir David Attenborough, you mentioned the F in the finance. If you follow what Attenborough and a lot of other people have said, despite all the efforts and things you're quoting, which are very, very good and need to be followed up, there is still the major decline going on. And while we're looking at the F in finance, we've got the other elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room relates to the IPAT equation. The impact we have is population times technology times affluence. And the one thing we're not discussing, which I think really needs to do, that really needs to be taken on board, is the impact of numbers of population. Here, it is not completely compatible. It will eventually undermine the really good work you are doing, and historically has done.
Well, sir, I'm not going to be committing to saying that we should eliminate people in order to save the planet. Well, you've talked about overpopulation. So in that regard, sir, I'm not getting into that, nor am I going to tell people they can't eat meat either. I mean, we just have to be sensible and pragmatic about how we make this move on restoring nature. And that is why, if I think about how since 2010, in terms of creating or restoring habitat, we've done that in this country, something about the size of Dorset. I mean, that's the scale of action that we are taking. And it will take some time to get through in terms of what that means, and all the reminding ourselves that we are the most monitored country in the world, more monitored than in Wales, more monitored than Northern Ireland, more monitored than Scotland on all sorts of environmental indicators. And we do that because we don't want to look away and hide where problems are. It's actually the job of Conservatives to face into some of the challenges, to come up with pragmatic, effective solutions so that we can continue to try and make sure that we have a green and pleasant land. I'll take it from that lady there.
Yes, I'm very perturbed about the amount of solar panels going on good farmland. And the other day on the radio I heard somebody had agreed to have 10,000, to have some of these on their land, and it would do 10,000 houses. Why don't we put them on the houses and not ruin our farmland, which is meant to be environmentally friendly and to feed us?
So at the moment, about 70% of the land in England is used for agriculture. And the department, I think, for energy has done a calculation which suggests that about 1% of that land could be used to help with solar farms and the level of solar energy that's expected from there. Yes, of course, there's always an opportunity to put solar panels on more brownfield sites. We're legislating at the moment to allow permitted development rights. And in terms of, at the moment, Michael Gove, who leads on house building, is in the preparations of future housing standards. So it's a variety of ways, but I understand, and it's why the general guidance is that our best agricultural land should not be used for solar panels, but it can be if that's what the local council decides. But that's certainly not the guidance. And the more that we can convert that to being productive land, but also making the most of our sustainable financial incentive, our countryside stewardship schemes, our HLS and similar, that's what matters about bringing together food production and also being environmentally sustainable. It will be good for profit, and it will be good for the planet, and that's our outcome that we seek to achieve. There was a lady here, and then I think that will be the last one. I knew you were from West Suffolk, I knew you were from Huntingdon. It'd be great to say who you won where, which constituency you're from.
With pleasure. Hello, sorry. My name is Gali Mishkovic. I come from London,
Okay.
Hampstead and Kilburn, I believe. My take on this world is that I work in the world of luxury tourism. Our clients are worldwide, international. We are based in London. To Berkeley travel, and I've noticed with the clients like these that when they go into places, they're very keen nowadays not to just come and visit and taste and spend and go away with pictures, but they actually, but because of the means they have, they're actually very interested in actually leaving and helping the local population, local. I mean, I'm thinking about National Trust, about beautiful buildings and things. These things are done elsewhere. Obviously, England is a different story, but in terms of nature itself, we are looking at how we can help our clients to feel right about it and move along with them. The rewilding, as I'm saying it right, rewilding initiatives, that is what we're looking at. I just wanted your view on that. I know there is a rewilding EU, and we're looking at there's a few places in the UK that are doing just that, basically letting nature take over and come back. What are your point of view on that?
So one of the things is looking about nature restoration, and that's why we've spending significant sums of money on landscape recovery programs, which are big scale in what they are trying to achieve. Now, through our farming initiatives, and remember that I think our farmers are the original friends of the earth. They are the people who've been the custodians of the countryside. They are the people who are helping nature thrive. But we do need to, are helping them incentivise the things like money to not only plant hedgerows, but to manage them effectively in terms of how we're incentivising moving away towards integrated pest management, so a more natural approach in the basis of that. So there's a different variety of programmes that we can do to try and help that. That's why, as I say, there's some huge landscaper programmes, but also what I'm finding is some of the most effective ones are those that are delivered by farmers working together. And it's why next year, as one of our extra incentives, people will get a premium if they work together to make sure, going back to the Lawton principles of nature, and thinking instead of it, if you can connect your hedgerows in a particular part of Suffolk, wherever, might not work quite so much in London, but that will then be a super highway for insects and similar. And that's the sort of, by incentivising people to work together, never mind just undertake the activity, we'll see a much bigger return. And those sort of clusters are present around the country, but not to the scale that we would like, and that I hope we will see happening in the next couple of years. Sam, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. As members might realise, the life of the Secretary of State means that you often move from place to place, but I hope that you have a really successful event. I know that we've got the video from Sir David. I must admit, one of my most treasured possessions is actually a Christmas present he sent me when I was an Environment Minister before, because he knows that I'm pretty sure he knows I've got nature in my heart and that I want it to thrive and survive. And it's good to have Sen here to also be a part of the Conservative Party where that's your top priority, and it keeps us real and keeps us rooted in reality and what we need to do. Thanks so much.
Many thanks, Secretary of State, for that opening speech and for taking some questions. Very grateful for your time. I know how busy your conference schedule will be. So now I'd like to go to the video from the Wild Isles series, which, as I mentioned, I think captured the country's imagination earlier in the year when it aired across 5 parts. And I think the first episode had 10 million views, including the online views. So I think really put a spotlight on some of the amazing bits of nature that we have across our British Isles. So this video will just give us a flavour of it.
Our Wild Isles are home to spectacular wildlife and astonishing beauty, to rival almost anywhere on the planet. But looks can be deceiving. Today, a quarter of our mammals and 1/3 of our birds are at risk of extinction. And we have been part of the problem. We are now one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth.
There's undoubtedly the feeling that it's either nature or it's food production. I think it's the complete opposite of that.
Without nature, we wouldn't be able to survive.
It's now at a point where it's too important to get it wrong.
Unless we see ourselves as inherently part of nature and connected to it, the environmental crises that affect us will only get worse.
Nature is providing a wide range of essential services, and it's doing it for nothing.
In a nature-depleted country, simply put, we wouldn't be able to operate as a business.
There are just a few short years for us to act. We can be the first generation to leave these isles in better shape than we found them. We must all play our part.
We all come from nature, and it needs all of us on board to protect it.
We need hands on deck. Whole of government, whole of society, whole of sectors, together.
This starts and ends with us.
Good. So we'll now... Sorry, I thought I'd preempted the end there. So we'll now turn to our panel to reflect on some of the themes that were raised in that video and indeed in the Secretary of State's speech. So just to briefly introduce them, and then we'll come to them each to give 3 minutes of opening remarks, and then it's thrown open to you for some questions. So please be having a think about what you'd like to ask our panel. So first off, Theresa Villiers, who's the MP for Chipping Barnet and a member of the Sen Parliamentary Caucus. She previously served as Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. We've got Councillor Joe Porter, who represents Brownedge and Endon on Staffordshire Moorlands District Council, and is also a member of the Sen Advisory Council since 2021. And then we've got Aisling McGarrigle, who's an Ocean and Climate Policy Officer at the Blue Marine Foundation. And then we've got Hilary McGrady, who's the Director General of the National Trust. So huge thanks to you all for joining today for this panel discussion. So to begin opening remarks, I'll hand over to Theresa.
Well, thank you, Sam, for inviting me to this event. I'm so pleased that Sen are here at the Conservative Party conference. You do a fantastic job in highlighting these two crucial challenges that we face as a society: protection of nature and protection of the climate. And I strongly feel, as I've said many times, that nature recovery should be a core goal for anyone in elected office. There can be few things more important than protection and recovery of the natural environment, and handing on these beautiful islands in a better state than we found them. And I accept that there's a crisis. I accept the situation is very serious. I accept that there is a huge amount of work to be done. But I think there are grounds for hope. We are making some real progress, and I genuinely believe that no government in history has done as much to protect nature and the climate as this one has. The Environment Act means that we are setting those world-leading targets to restore nature, including the promise to halt species decline by 2030. Whilst transitions of this magnitude are never easy, we are now in the process of replacing the Common Agricultural Policy with a far better scheme, which is already incentivising farmers to play their part in meeting our nature goals. And that is a truly world-leading example we're setting. Incentives to manage hedgerows for wildlife, plant nectar-rich flowers, plant more trees, and provide better habitats for pollinators. We've got our 750 million Nature for Climate Fund, which is supporting peatland restoration and tree planting and other great projects. We've provided some tremendous leadership on the global stage. It was our COP in Glasgow which put nature at the forefront of the climate debate, really for the first time, and saw 40 countries, home to 90% of the world's forests, make a historic promise to halt deforestation by the end of the decade. And I think our DEFRA team played a really impressive role in that global deal that was struck in Montreal on new targets for protecting the natural world. But as I say, I acknowledge the task ahead is huge. The State of Nature report was a reminder of that. And we all know how important it is, and we were reminded of that by the horrific destruction of the sycamore tree at Hadrian's Wall, which has, demonstrated, I think, the huge sort of cultural and spiritual significance that nature has for us, as well as those kind of environmental and economic ones that you heard about in the film. So we have to deliver that nature recovery network we've promised, those corridors connecting nature. We must ensure that local nature recovery strategies and other innovation under the Act, we must ensure that they have real teeth, that they're not just buried under a whole pile of local planning policies. The government's tree planting programme has to accelerate beyond anything that's ever been achieved in this country before. We have to deliver our promise to enhance protections in the planning system for woodlands and veteran trees. We must get that biodiversity net gain obligation into operation as soon as possible. We're promised it's on its way soon, that this delay is just a temporary one. And of course, we must continue that crucially important agricultural transition. So lots to do, but I think grounds to optimism. We can do this. The mechanisms are in place. We've just got to deliver now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Theresa, and a great list there of things that the government can and is doing to crack on with turning the tide on nature decline. Hand over now to Joe Porter.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. I'll start by saying that I actually share my birthday with Sir David Attenborough on the 8th of May, so I'm very proud to share my birthday with him. Always been a great honour, that has. And I think we can all agree in this room that nature unites all of our communities. We saw during the pandemic how blessed we were to have nature on our doorsteps, and we know it can bring great joy and happiness to all of us in our lives. It can be absolutely vital for things like mental health and well-being, and I think the pandemic was an opportunity for us to actually realise just how blessed we are to have all of that on our doorsteps. And obviously I'm here today to talk about the role that councils have got to play in all of this. Councils have got a very central role to play in the Environment Act. It mandated local authorities to put together local nature recovery strategies, and there's also the big focus on biodiversity net gain that Theresa just referred to. And we've seen a huge decline in wild species since the 1970s. Over 40% of our wild species have declined, and in our local areas we've all got unique species that matter to us greatly. So in the Staffordshire Moorlands we have the Cllr. So the Cllr is a very special bird that's actually on our Staffordshire Moorlands District Council logo. It's something that's very precious for our local area, with us being part of the Peak District National Park, and it's something that we'll be focusing a lot on going forward. And what we've done in the Staffordshire Moorlands is we've treated this as a top priority since we declared a climate and nature emergency in 2019. We've got our local plan for nature, which we've spent the last couple of years putting together with Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. That plan aims to halt the decline in nature by 2030 and to have 30% of land allocated for nature recovery. Our starting point is 18%, and we're a rural area. A lot of urban areas obviously be lower than that, but 18%, we've got to climb up, up to 30%. It is going to be quite a big climb, but what we'll be doing is we'll be having a partnership approach where we work with farmers and landowners, businesses, communities to make all of that happen. We've already made a good start. So we've got the Wilder River Turnip project, where we've had 8 different countryside sites across the whole district where we've been improving water quality and improving climate resilience with £176,000 of money from the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. We've also got our 11 countryside sites that we've just handed over to Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, who can do a better job than the council for nature recovery. And I think it's that in that particular example, it's worth pointing out that sometimes councils need to step back and actually let the experts take on that management, which is what we did with Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. We let them take on that role. Another thing that we're doing as part of our plan for nature is we've got a citizen science project where we're going to encourage local residents to go out in their local areas, identify the key species and how much of that species is the population of that species in those particular areas. It's part of the Staffordshire Ecological Project. So we're doing that. We're doing a lot of work on canals and waterways. So we know that canals and waterways are really important. We've got the Cllr Canal going right the way through the Staffordshire Moorlands, and we know that around 10 million people visit canals every year. So it's really important that we keep canals going, that we resource them properly, etc. And one other thing I will mention is in Staffordshire Moorlands, one particular project we've tried to champion is our community orchard project. So one thing that I'm particularly proud of is that we've got 25 community orchards across the district, and the reason why we've done this is community orchards are a fantastic way of bringing communities together to restore nature, improve climate resilience, but also try and create habitats for key species in that local area. And the thing that's also really good about community orchards that we've found in that area, it's a great way of bringing children and young people on board with all of this, because it gives them something tangible in their communities that they can focus on within schools, and they can also learn where food comes from. So it's really good for that side of things as well. But yeah, there's loads more things I can list, but as we go through the discussions I'll talk about some of the other things we've done in the Staffordshire Moorlands, and hopefully we can share best practice and expertise, because I think that's really important that we do that in this room.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. Now hand over to Ashley McGarrigle.
Thank Thank you so much for having me. So I'm kind of here today to talk a little bit about the state of RCs around the UK. And I need to kind of start by saying that they're probably not in the best place that they could be in. We have nearly 400 marine protected areas in our inshore and offshore waters, and of those, the area that's fully protected from fishing and invasive activities is smaller than the size of the city of Westminster, which is just not really great. This is because the approach that DEFRA and government currently takes to marine protection is feature-based, so you're only protecting certain species within the water column and the ecosystem, which is just not really how you see proper recovery and full-scale habitat restoration, which is a big shame. So I think one of the first steps that we definitely need to see policymakers taking is to designate fully protected sites. Richard Benyon 3 years ago published a HPMA review recommending 5 be designated in the UK, and DEFRA only did 3 earlier this year. So we're kind of already on the back foot in terms of that. And we know that fully protected sites can actually help fishing communities and help encourage more tourism to areas as well. So it's not just about nature recovery, it's about the entire approach. We know that we are overfishing quite a lot in our marine protected areas as well, which is a big problem, and that needs to stop. A lot of our fishing guidance isn't in line with scientific advice to actually make sure that we're managing our fisheries sustainably. And not only is this bad for the fish, but it's bad for the longevity of our coastal communities, which is not something that anyone wants to see depleted at all. So that's a real shame. So hopefully, DEFRA, we're going into negotiations soon, so hopefully that changes somewhere. Another thing I think that we need to be a lot more proactive in doing is doing active restoration. We kind of sometimes think that by doing MPAs that nature will just save itself, but in some cases for us I think it's definitely gone too far. We need to give nature a helping hand. We need to replace what we've taken away. Blue Marine Foundation, where I work, are actually doing a fantastic project in the Solent, and we're actively putting oysters and seagrass back into the water, and this is just catalysing what we hope will be fantastic nature recovery. And hopefully, it will work. And we've seen it work. We've seen populations of bluefin tuna come back to local areas, which has been fantastic. I don't think anyone at one point thought we would see that. So we know it does work. We just need real onus from the government and political will to do it. The UK are definitely a world leader in marine protection when it comes to our overseas territories and things a bit further afield. And I think we really need to see some of that ambition reflected closer to home if we want to protect our wild isles.
Great, thank you very much. That's a really good overview of some of the challenges in the marine environment. And now to finish off our opening remarks, I'll hand over to Hilary McGrady.
Thank you, Sam, and also thank you for the invitation to partner with you today. We've always had a really good relationship and we really appreciate that. I think it is safe to say that nature is in the people of the UK's DNA. I mean, Theresa mentioned the Sycamore Gap, and we published this book this year, The 50 Best Trees, and of course it's there. And I think what's interesting about that is actually the sort of human response that we have seen. My inbox has just gone into meltdown with that human response to something that people believe is part of them. And so tragic as that has been, and I have to say people have been in tears, people have been writing poetry, it's just been extraordinary. But what it did tell me was actually there is hope, because I believe so strongly that actually people will make the difference here. People have the ability to change the direction that we are undoubtedly going in. And while I completely acknowledge actually and applaud the fact that Britain has in many ways set out an ambition of where it wants to get to, let's not kid ourselves. We are in the bottom 10 countries in the world for depleted nature. That is a horrific bit of evidence to say that we have, and I include myself in this, in our watch we have let that decline happen. And I think that's horrific, and we need to do something about it. What Save Our Wild Isles did was actually bring that to people's attention. It is interesting because general public actually think that our nature's in pretty good health. I don't know if many of you watch Gogglebox, but there was one moment on Gogglebox where somebody said, I never thought there was a problem actually. I didn't even know we had puffins actually, and I had no idea that they're in decline. So the sense if I look out in a landscape, it's green, I see a few birds, all is well. Actually, clearly it's not. And that public understanding of the issue that we're trying to grapple all of a sudden came to light. 10 million people viewing that series, and people really starting to sit up and take notice. And on top of that, we had a piece of work that we did called People's Plan for Nature, which was a citizen assembly drawing 100 people together, members of the public drawn from all over the country saying, this matters to us and we want to do something about it. So I really do believe there is hope, but hope is only going to be realised if actually we give the people in the country the ability and the support to make things happen. And of course government do have a major part to play in that. And while I've said I think actually some of the ambition that's set out is brilliant, if the actions don't follow and don't make coherent sense, what's the point in having the targets in the first place? So you need to stay consistent with your action, and the first place that we would look to is definitely the farmers of the country. So the Secretary of State said the farmers were the original friends of the earth, and I would agree with that. They were originally the friends of the earth. I think for many, many years, many decades, they've been incentivised to not be the friends of the earth, actually. We've given them all of the wrong incentives that have actually fundamentally undermined the nature in this country. And I know, because we have lots of farmers who are tenants of the National Trust, they want to farm sustainably. They want to farm to enable nature to thrive as well as be able to produce food. And I know they can do it. And there's wonderful people in the audience that are already doing it. So what are we doing that really can give them long-term confidence to make the jump towards this? The ELM scheme has been too slow to roll out, and it's inconsistent and it's changing, and therefore the farmers are not convinced or incentivised sufficiently to actually get engaged. So that needs to happen. Equally, the regulatory environment needs to, again, be consistent, and it needs to be coherent to those targets that they have been set. So when you have things like the nutrient neutrality looking as if it's stepping back, that sends a message that we don't really mean what we say. I sat in a roundtable conversation about environmental organisations absolutely recognise that houses need to be built. Of course we do. But we don't believe it needs to be at the risk of the habitat regulation. Why are we unpicking the very thing that will secure the kind of targets that have been set out? There are other ways to mitigate it, not least giving the nutrient neutrality scheme the chance to work. Again, we have two schemes within the National Trust that are proven that they are starting to work. Finally, this point about really engaging private and public finance to make the difference. And we know that businesses are so far ahead of us on this. As an NGO, I very often will have to sit back in awe of where the private sector in particular are going. But they also need to be incentivised to make a difference. So that transition is fast. Because my final point here is our ambition is clear. The targets, we're getting there, but we have run out of time. So we can't have any retreat, any indication that we're stepping back, watering down, making bland, going back to original things like area-based payments. Any indication of that, we go backwards, and we will not deliver what we need to for our children and our children's children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilary, for that. So that concludes our opening remarks. Before throwing it open to you for your questions, I have a couple of questions of my own that I'm going to put to the panel. Firstly, to the two elected politicians on the panel, I wanted to get your view on what the main political barriers that you have observed in your work for nature recovery, thinking particularly some of the tensions that emerge with land use. One of the questions already talked about the solar farming tension, but we know that there are lots of others as well. So interested in your experience of those and how you can overcome them so that we can restore nature to these wild isles. Maybe if I start with Joe, you first.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Sam. I think when it comes to nature, like I was saying in my opening remark, it's something that actually unites communities, but there always will be some divisions about how we go about nature restoration, which is why I think it's absolutely crucial that we work with farmers, for example. I think farmers are actually one of our biggest allies in the fight to recover nature, because farmers, they know their land, they've been passed it down for generations, so they know their land, but at the same time, we do also need to educate people on how they can better manage their land in certain ways. But I think we've got to work with people, and I think instead of having a top-down approach, we've got to have very much a bottom-up approach when it comes to this. We've got to allow communities to come up with their own ideas and then to put that forwards. And I think one really good example of that is so in the Staffordshire Moorlands, we're very blessed to have a lot of friends groups, a lot of volunteer groups who manage our nature reserves and countryside sites. I think those groups of people are very powerful because they are a classic living example of people who really care about nature in their local areas. They've got that local, because they actually live in that area, they really care about that particular green space. So what they've done is they've set up that volunteer group, that friends group. So for example, at the moment in my council ward, we're setting up the Friends of Marshes Hill Common to help restore a lowland heathland that's Marshes Hill, that's a site of biological interest, and it's really important that we restore. And I think the role of those groups is absolutely crucial because they know that local area and they obviously have that local interest. So I think we should try and work with people, and we should try and let it be a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. That's what I would say on that.
Great, thanks, Joe. Theresa?
I think capacity is an issue. For example, we've had quite demanding tree planting targets for a long time, and we've consistently not met them. And that is not for the lack of willingness to do it. It's just, the capacity to get these projects delivered is sometimes a challenge, and the same goes for peatland. When it comes to land use competition and farming, there's always the inevitable tension, in that you want to provide support for food security and to enable farmers to earn a living, but you also want to make sure that it delivers the genuine environmental goods, the public goods that we're now committed to. That is an incredibly difficult balance to get. You want the scheme to be accessible to as many farmers as possible, but you don't want to reinvent the basic payment scheme with just a sort of greenwashing label on it. So that, I think, is a challenge. I think local government does have a crucial role to play here, and we all know that local government finances just aren't under immense pressure from the social care bill, so I think that is also a concern. And lastly, on house building, absolutely, we need to build new homes for young people, but we do have to make sure that we build the right homes in the right places, and we don't compromise our commitment to nature in the rush to build new homes.
Great, thank you very much, Theresa. And now to the two environmental charity representatives on the panel. I want to ask how you think we can build momentum among the public off the back of this Wild Isles series, because as we heard, it's had really good viewership. It has engaged a lot of people, perhaps exposed the parlour state of nature in lots of the UK, but how can we translate that into greater awareness, I suppose, among the public, and try and lead into positive change? Hilary, if I can put that over to you.
Yeah, to my point, I genuinely do think it'll be the public that will make the difference here. Building awareness is your first step, and so Save Our Wild Isles has started that process, but there's a long way to go. I think education, and certainly in schools, has got to play a major part. I'm actually not particularly close to it, but what I do see is lots of school children coming to us with a disconnect to nature, a lack of understanding of where their food comes from, why it matters, what the relationship is between bugs and pollinators through to food. That basic understanding and connection to nature has been lost, so there's something very fundamental about that. But David Attenborough does say that if people know about it, they have to also experience it in order to want to care for it. So there is something about building in incentives through schools, through second and third level education, to really find ways to engage the public in ways that they can actually interact with nature, whether that's things from allotments within urban areas, whether it's mechanisms to get people out into the countryside, build a more accessible pathway to enable people to engage with nature. Without that, I can't see how the public are going to find a way to understand nature and want to do something about it.
And Aisling?
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with Hilary. I think definitely in terms of the ocean, it's so hard to know what's in there unless you're in scuba diving. So education is a massive thing for us at Blue. We have a fantastic education project in Jersey, and we've introduced a snorkel trail, and we get the school kids to come down and snorkel, and they see all the incredible creatures under the water, and they want to go again and again, and it's really encouraging them to become marine biologists and to try and save the ocean, which is so good. But I think it is series like Wild Isles that brings it into your home, especially with these underwater habitats that we know are so vital, but you just don't get to see unless you're going to go and get in there. So I think education and promotion is really key.
Great, thank you very much. Right, questions. So just a reminder, please say your name and any affiliation when you make your question, and also please keep it reasonably short and question based rather than statement based. Keen to get through as many as we can given the size of the audience. So we'll start with these two here at the front.
Hello, thank you. Jen Elford, Head of Policy at the Vegetarian Society. We love the words of David Attenborough, but not so much when he is telling us to look at our diets and eat less meat. I'd be curious to know, however, what Sen and the panel believe should be the key actions for government or for their own constituency or organisation to address the land use change and livestock reduction needed to align with the net zero 30% meat reduction required by 2030.
Thank you very much.
Hello, so Theresa, I know you have campaigned in the past against unsustainable house building. What do you think about the nutrient neutrality proposals, and will you be voting against it when it comes to Parliament? And can I ask a cheeky one to Hilary? So the National Trust and you personally have been attacked by sometimes Conservative MPs and others for taking stances against nature depleting policies. How do you feel about it, and how do you feel about campaigning against policies now like nutrient neutrality?
Let's take one more. Yes, the gentleman here.
I'm Roland Furby, a farmer, and I completely disagree with knocking the nutrient neutrality proposals. It was a silly idea. The problem was nutrients going into the watercourse, so Natural England did nothing about that. Instead, they would take some land out of production. The 2017 Paris Accord, or whatever it was, said you hadn't to take land out of production. When land's farmed and stock walk off it or produce is taken off it, you've reduced the nutrients in the land. The folks have known that for 10,000 years. The problem is the nutrients in the sewage. They've taken the phosphates out. They should be given, there's £60 million kicking around in Teesside. They should be given that to take the nitrate out as well. It's not bailing them out. It wasn't in the manifestos when they were privatised. I think that's doing away with the nutrient neutrality on land is a good thing. Taking it out of the watercourses would be the brilliant thing, would be the answer.
Thank you very much. Well, let's take those. So, question on sort of nutrient neutrality. I'm going to start with Theresa and then throw it over to Hilary, and you might also pick up Hannah's question as well about campaigning.
I absolutely want to see strong protections for our waterways, but I'm afraid I'm not convinced that the current rules that we inherited from the EU are the best way to do that. So I was supportive of the change that the government wanted to make. It's obviously stalled now because it was defeated in the House of Lords. But I just think that a complete ban on house building in significant swathes of the country on the basis of the nutrient impact is too drastic a way to deal with this, and there are more targeted ways in which we can reduce nutrient pollution, not least by supporting agriculture in the areas concerned to find alternative ways to make sure that slurry and pollution do not get into our waterways. In terms of meat consumption, I think we should be proud that much of our livestock production is amongst the most ecologically sustainable in the world here. And as I said in my opening remarks, we need to continue that journey to make sure that our farming is as nature friendly as possible. But personally, I don't believe that means drastic reductions in livestock production. And I think that sort of probably broadly covers the questions.
Does, yeah. Hilary?
Okay, thank you. Just on nutrient neutrality, the sort of, with respect, the idea that nutrient neutrality caused a complete ban on building is clearly, with respect, not true. I think certainly it was one of the challenges for developers, but what we're hearing from developers is that actually the scheme was going to be a really great solution for them. And actually in lifting, or the proposal to lift the ban, was actually releasing on a very, very small number of houses to be built. Our argument is not that you should stop building. We want to be able to build. We just don't think that this needed to happen. And in particular, starting to unpick the habitat regulation was a very drastic way to achieve something that actually could have been achieved through another method. And I think it is an interesting case in point where actually it's the public's absolute fury at the state of our rivers that influenced the vote. It's about water quality, it's about people's lives and how they value their environment, and that actually, I think, swung the vote. But so that's my view. And then relating that point to how comfortable I feel about campaigning, I've got very thick skin these days. But to be really clear, the National Trust was founded to actually look after green space. That's where we started, and all the way through our 128 years, we have very consistently campaigned for the protection of the countryside as well as our houses. And of course, we don't really see a distinction because our houses sit in our landscapes, don't they? But I would be really honest that the crisis that we're facing, the climate crisis and the nature crisis, that is why we're coming more to the fore. As an organisation, we've always risen to the thing that the nation has needed from us most at any point in time. After the war, it was our houses that were in real dire need of support, and we put our focus there. We're in a crisis, and we're very proud to be able to stand up with all political parties and demand more for the nation. Thank you.
Joe, do you want to come in on the diet change question?
Before I do so, I just want to comment on the National Trust and campaign. I just want to say, as a proud National Trust member, I fully support what Hilary's just said. I think the National Trust do an excellent job of campaigning to protect our green spaces and our heritage, and I think it's a clear part of your DNA, the stuff that you're doing on climate and nature. So I fully support everything that you're doing on that, and I regularly visit National Trust properties, so I see the work that you're doing in action. Regarding meat consumption, I think what's important is that we give people maximum choice for sustainable food. So if people want to reduce their meat consumption, that choice should be available to them. But equally, I think if people want to continue eating meat, I think they should be allowed to. And the thing that I've always advocated is that you try and buy local and buy British as much as possible. So I've got my local butchers, W. James Butchers, down the road. Their farms they've got several farms, they're all within a 5-mile radius of the butcher's shop. The slaughterhouse is at the back of the butcher's shop. Everything's local. That's why I support them, that's why I get my meat from there, because it's all locally done, and that reduces my carbon footprint because it's all done locally. But at the same time, if people want to choose to go vegetarian or vegan, they don't want to eat meat, then I fully support their choice to do that. I don't think we should be forcing anybody on this. I think maximum choice and trying to buy and eat locally, that's the way forward with this.
Right, thanks, Joe. Let's take another batch of questions. So, where's the microphone? Maybe let's go to this side now. So, yeah, the lady there, just before the aisle.
Hello, my name's Rachel Hamilton. I'm a Member of Parliament in the Scottish Parliament. We've just got the agricultural bill laid before us, and we'll have to work our way through that. Hilary, your Natural Trust manifesto says that food and nature go hand in hand, and I think that's really important. But my question is do you think that as we look at the agricultural bill in Scotland, that all the things everybody wants farmers to do to reduce emissions and to bring, to capture carbon, that we can do that with the current agricultural budget? My view is that we look at other budgets, such as the environmental budget, to ensure that we can support farmers to plant trees and do all the rest that we're asking of them.
Great, let's take another one. Yeah, Katie, there's a lady in the row in front.
Hi there, I'm from River Action. Following the questions about nutrient neutrality, recent polling showed that over 50% of the electorate were going to be thinking about river pollution when they vote at the next election. So what should the Conservative Party doing, and if you're not from the Conservative Party, what should parties be doing to try and reassure voters when they take their vote?
Great, thank you. And then let's go to Paul.
Paul Haslam, North Yorkshire Council, councillor. My question really relates to, first of all, thank you very much for, there's lots of tips I've written down, so thank you for that, I'll be taking them away. My question relates to the fact is that we like cuddly animals, we like nice fish, we like otters and stuff, but I'm very concerned about the number of insects. You know, bumblebees, we see them, and we honeybees. I actually am a beekeeper, and I have quite a reasonable sized piece of land that's been completely organic for nearly 20 years now, and the number of insects just bothers me, and I just wonder if we've got the air quality issues really right, and I'd like to know what the panel think about air quality. We've talked about land and we've talked about sea, but we haven't, and water, but we haven't really discussed air. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. So we've got a question about the size of the farming budget and whether they're being sufficiently supported, particularly in the Scottish context, but I think more broadly, to deliver better outcomes for nature. Question about river pollution and what should the government and the Conservative Party be saying on that. And then final question about insect population decline and whether air quality potentially has a role to play in explaining that. Shall we start with Aisling? I know you're more marine than rivers, but perhaps you wanted to comment on the water quality question.
Yes, I think water quality is a massive issue. A bit of insight. I actually worked for DEFRA before I joined Blue Marine Foundation, so I'm well familiar with water quality issues. I think we really need to see, the storm overflow plan, that the Secretary of State mentioned initially was great, but there is a fundamental issue in the plumbing of this country. It's just not. It's not fit for purpose. It's not fit to stop, our sewage and our grey water getting mixed up, and hence the overflow, the spillovers that we see. I appreciate this is a massive infrastructure project to fix, but I do think there needs to be something done, because otherwise we're going to kind of keep coming up with these temporary solutions. And I think there needs to be a real significant change in how the infrastructure works to get anywhere with that.
Great, thank you. I'll also pose the water quality river question to you, Theresa, if that's all right.
Yes, everyone agrees that the current frequency and magnitude of storm overflow discharges is completely unacceptable. Our Victorian sewage system has served us for hundreds of years, but as Aisling says, it's desperately in need of investment and modernisation, and that must happen, and that is in the government's plan for water. And we now have the toughest rules that we've ever had on overflow discharges, and they must be rigorously enforced. Things cannot possibly go on as they are. We need to recognise the massive public concern about this. Things will change, they are changing, and it's vital that they do. Quite happy to say a bit on the other issues as well. On resources for farm support, it's a perennial question. I suppose it takes me back to the earlier question about what are the barriers here, and of course competing for government resources is always hugely difficult when it comes to farm support payments, but we must invest in nature if we are to protect it. I managed to secure a commitment in the manifesto in 2019 that we would maintain our current levels of agricultural subsidy. And I think that's vitally important, but you're absolutely right. Support for this transition on agricultural land probably does require funds that go above and beyond what is currently committed for farm support payments. And in terms of insect conservation, you are absolutely right. The thing that I find most visible about nature depletion over my lifetime is there are far fewer insects. The flying insects seem sometimes to be a comparative rarity in this country, which was absolutely not the case when I was growing up. So that is an extremely urgent reason to restore habitat so we can bring back those vital parts of our ecosystem.
Hilary, I'll come to you next because Rachel's question was posed directly at you, so I'll give you a chance to answer that one.
Yeah, of course, the National Trust only operates in Wales, England and Northern Ireland, so I wouldn't want to comment specifically on Scotland, but actually the issues are common to all. There is definitely budgetary pressure, as Theresa said, completely recognise that, but we also have to realise we are in a cost of living crisis and everything else. So while budget, and we estimate that there needs to be at least another $1 billion put into the farming schemes, recognising that that is probably unlikely. Actually, we think there's a lot that we can get on with right now. I mentioned it earlier, consistency around the ELM scheme, giving farmers the chance to actually plan ahead, to know what they are actually getting themselves involved with, to know which scheme is the right one for them, to make sure that the people that have an entry level are getting clear guidance as to what we want from them, but also and not to leave behind the farmers who are already out there doing really ambitious nature work. We mustn't leave them behind, because they're the ones that are actually at the vanguard of really making big scale changes that if we work together, and I do support Secretary of State mentioned about working in collaboration with other people. We cannot use the budget thing as being the reason for not getting on. We have things that we can do right now, whether that's in England or Scotland. Can I also just make the comment about insects? It is about air quality, but it's actually much more about habitat. Insects, if you get your habitats right and your ecosystem right, insects will thrive. So air has a bit to do with it, but that's again back to things like overuse of pesticides, intensification, all of those kinds of things. We have to face into these challenges if we're going to make a difference to these really, really important bits of our nature on which we all survive.
Great. Joel, I'll come to you in the next batch of questions, if that's okay, because I'm keen to get through more questions. Yes, there's a gentleman right here at the front who will come to first in this batch. Yeah, so just the microphone on its way. Ooh.
I better sit down. It's not liking me, obviously. Thanks very much. I'm Martin Kennedy. I'm a beef and sheep hill farmer from Highland Perthshire in Scotland, and I'm also president of the National Farmers Union for Scotland. Just a couple of points with Hilary. There's a number of things that you said that I completely agree with. However, I maybe slightly take issue in when you said that farmers were original environmentalists, and now they were incentivised to do that. Now they're incentivised not to be the environmentalist. I would suggest that's not correct. We've been incentivised to produce food cheaply, which is a real concern that we have here throughout the UK. We're paying the lowest amount for our food across the whole of Europe, which is not a great statistic given the standards of animal welfare, of environmental standards we're trying to do. And I think we've got to remember that because that's been driven in that direction, unless we see a change in the values of our food, that's why we waste a third of it. We're wasting a third of our food, and the reason we do that is because we take it for granted, and it's always going to be there, and it's always going to be cheap. Now, there's a lot of fruit and veg at the minute are really, really getting hit really, really hard. Unless they see a change in this, right across all sectors, unless they see a change in this, we will be producing less here in the UK. And if we produce less here in the UK, we will simply offshore our emissions and our environmental and animal welfare standards to other parts of the world that don't have the same care and attention. Now, it's a horrible, wet, dreich, terrible day outside just now, but rain's our biggest asset, and believe me, from a Scottish perspective, it's a big asset to have. But that's one of our biggest assets, so the more we can do in a sustainable manner and produce food here in a sustainable manner, the more we're benefiting the environment and climate change right across the globe. Because whatever we do, we're not just going to sort things for straight above us, the emissions and climate straight above us. So your education point is hugely important. What can you and others do to actually get this across to the younger generation in schools? Get it on the curriculum. If food, climate and biodiversity are at the top of the agenda, why are we not talking about it in our schools?
Great, thank you very much. Lady there, 2 or 3 rows back. So just pass the microphone back.
Thank you. Cllr Box from Friends of the Earth. The panel has said quite a lot today about how great targets are, but how important it is that they're backed up with action, and also that those who break the rules are held to account. the sewage overflow scandal seems to suggest that that isn't really working right now. Friends of the Earth supports the introduction of a legal right to a healthy environment, which would allow people and communities to challenge action or indeed inaction that leads to environmental damage, dirtier water, polluted air, the destruction of habitats. So my question is, can we expect the government to introduce such a piece of legislation that might help people take more responsibility for ensuring that we have a healthy environment to live in and that others do in the future too?
Great, thank you very much for that. And I'll just take one more from the lady here. Yeah, just there, hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have already had my joy of asking a question, but this is directly related to the question of education. It's true, children, they start with being very connected with nature. They're very interested in everything that crawls and they look at grass and they look at everything around. And then comes a moment when they get totally disconnected and to go onto iPhones and Instagram, and that's that. So if we try to go through schools, they won't work because schools are schools. But if, just wondering, especially for you, Hilary, if there is something like that there, to actually connect the children directly to maybe national trust policies, the government as well, I don't know what's there, but is there any initiative to speak to them in their language, which is today language of social media? We like it, we don't like it, it's a fact. Maybe there's a way to talk to them through Instagram and bring them out actually out of the living room into the real world, because I think that's the only way it'll work. You see what I mean?
Yes. Great, thank you very much for those questions. So we've got a question about the fact that farmers have been incentivised to produce cheap food and the need to make sure we don't just offshore our food production through nature recovery. A question about whether we should bring in sort of rights around the environment instead of just targets, and then a question about how to engage children. So I might come to Hilary first to respond to that question about from the NFU Scotland.
Yeah, and forgive me, I didn't mean to imply that everything that you've said is not valid, and I think we're probably in violent agreement, to be honest. Waste is a significant problem for this country, so there is a lot of food that's produced, and through lack of understanding that actually it is a really precious commodity that needs to be thought through and waste reduced, that of itself is back to an education issue for the general population. To your point about is it reasonable for a farmer to expect to get decent money for the produce they produce? Of course, and I completely agree that there's no point in simply offshoring the carbon issue, but actually a lot of our food that is produced actually goes out of the country. It doesn't feed the people here, as we well know. A lot of it goes elsewhere, and actually very often it goes elsewhere not to be consumed, but to produce energy and all sorts of other things. I would entirely support that our farmers need to be supported to make a living and get a fair price with the supermarkets. So none of these initiatives are, it's pointless to only do education or only do policy. These need joined up strategies across all of the business sectors, which is why I was particularly pleased with the Save Our Wildlife that the private sector came on board so fully with it. And we've had a number of events where they're actually pushing us to go even stronger and harder and faster on these things. So I completely agree with what you're saying.
Great. And now can I bring in Joe? Joe, do you want to pick up on the point about how do we engage children more with nature and some of the challenges with doing it in a school setting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a school governor. I've been a school governor for the last 5 years, and this is something I'm particularly passionate about. We're part of the Church of England Academy Trust, and we very much push nature as being part of the curriculum, trying to get children to connect with nature and the great outdoors. And I think, again, going back to what I said earlier on, I think during lockdown, a lot of children were able to engage with the outdoors, the wild space, green spaces around them, and I think we need to keep pushing that going forwards. I think we need to get more young people out there enjoying fresh air in the countryside, because it's not only good for nature and their awareness of nature, it's also good for their health and well-being too, because we've got a massive problem with, obesity and stuff like that, and this is actually a solution to a lot of those health issues. Nature is a solution to a lot of those health issues for our young people, and I think a lot of young people really care about nature and climate change. We need to give them the opportunities to actually make a difference on the ground. So what we've done in the Staffordshire Moorlands is we've got a climate youth programme where what we're doing is we're working with local youth groups to engage them in a leadership programme where we equip the young people with the skills they need to campaign on the environment and run projects in their local communities, which is a really good way of equipping those young people with skills for life as well. So as they go into adulthood, they will know how to look at these issues and live more sustainable, healthy lives. So that's what we've tried to do in the Staffordshire Moorlands, working with youth groups and lots of different community groups, and it's going really well.
Great, and I think Hilary wants to come in quickly on that.
It was really just to build on that. I don't know if my mic's on. Just to build on that point, there is very severe inequality of access to green space in this country. It's particularly obviously pronounced in urban areas, and you're sitting in one of the cities of the most depleted green space. And that does need to be addressed. COVID really brought that into focus, where people simply didn't have anywhere of quality green space. They might have had a green patch somewhere, but that was largely denuded of nature. So I actually do applaud within the implementation plan, there is an ambition to have everyone able to have access to green space within 15 minutes. And I think that's, again, a fantastic ambition. The follow through, the making it happen thing is just not there. And just as a little, and it's a plug for the National Trust, I have to say, you're 10 minutes away from Castlefield Viaduct, which if you watch Gardener's World, you will have seen it. We brought a little bit of green beauty into the middle of Manchester at Castlefield, a publicly owned piece of beautiful industrial heritage made green, and the people that are going there are people from the local community who don't have gardens, who don't have green space. They're having a little bit of access to nature. They're learning a little bit about why it matters. They're learning about insects, and actually a little tiny bit of water about this size, and a duck decided to come and land on it. And I just thought, if you bring nature close to where people are and you give nature a chance, it will thrive. But you have to make it happen.
Great. I'll now turn to Theresa. I don't think you could pick up on the question about whether we should have environmental rights added into legislation to complement the targets.
I mean, it is an interesting idea. I don't think I would go as far as to endorse it, but obviously at the heart of the Environment Act is this principle that government departments are held to account on the basis of whether or not they meet their legally binding targets. So there are elements of that legal framework already in place. If I could just add something on education, I think you make such a valid point that children start out with such a wonderful appreciation and enthusiasm for nature, which probably disappears while they're teenagers, which is so sad, because I think there's almost no kind of health or mental health issue or crisis in one's life that isn't improved by spending time in a beautiful natural environment. So I'd endorse everything that's been said about it being part of our curriculum in schools, but I think the NHS also needs to drive forward this whole idea of social prescribing and how we could use natural spaces to try and deal with some of the sort of very considerable mental health issues that our children are facing. But it is, yes, an astonishingly difficult issue, but that has to be a crucial part of how we protect nature, and that's one of the reasons why DEFRA has set these targets for improving access to nature, which, as Hilary rightly points out, it became so obvious during the COVID epidemic, there is massive inequality in relation to that access, which we have to deal with and even out.
And then actually, if I can come to you, just to slightly modify the question from the NFU Scotland around, as we've heard a lot about some of the tensions or the importance of reconciling food production and nature recovery on land. What do you find the debate to be like in the marine environment, some of the tensions between marine protection and fishing and food production?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some tensions. I think a lot of the issue comes that some fishing communities might think that NGOs just want to see everything protected and no fishing, but that's not the case at all. We want to see sustainable fishing. That is kind of where the issue comes in. And if we keep depleting our fish stocks like we are now, there just won't be any eventually, and then that will then there'll be no food for anyone. So that's kind of the end of that. But I think there's a real fine line, and I think if you do implement proper marine protection, you will see recovery on the overspill, and we have seen that before in these tiny no-take zones that we do have. So I think whilst there are tensions, I think it's just about compromise, and we're trying to get there. But I think if we can work together and kind of when we have more evidence to prove that MPAs do not ruin the fishing industry, I think that would really help our fight.
Great, thank you. Let's take another batch of questions. So the gentleman who stood up right at the back, let's go to him.
Hi, thank you. David Jones, a Conservative Party member, no affiliations to any other organisations. Listening to the debate and the importance that's put on a number of the areas that you've all talked about, something that strikes me is whether there are greater powers needed by either enforcement agencies or local government, local councils to enforce actions and also to act when perpetrators of pollution, etc., are found to be operating.
Thanks very much. I had one more question here.
Thank you. My name's Ali. I work for FairShare, with UK's largest food redistribution charity. The gentleman over there mentioned that a third of the food that we grow goes to waste. He's absolutely correct. The WWF just put out a report quantifying that in tonnes. It's 3 million tonnes. That's the equivalent of 7 billion meals. This is at a time when there's a cost of living crisis and, you know, charities can't get enough food to meet the increase in demand. So my question to the panel is pretty simple. What more can the government do to reduce food waste and get more food to those who need it?
Great. And do we have any more questions? Yes, there's a lady right at the back, and I think given the number of hands, I'll probably make that the last round. So,
yes, Phoebe Clay from Unchecked UK. And just picking up on the point just there regarding the enforcement of regulations, just to really sort of highlight the crisis that a lot of regulators are facing at the moment. The cuts have been severe, and that has also led to significant staffing cuts, less inspections, less testing, and also less prosecutions. So just to sort of really highlight that point, because I think Hilary's really compelling point is, you know, we need to have follow through when we set targets, and without regulators we can't do that.
Great, thank you very much. I might come to Theresa first for that question around regulators and whether they have sufficient powers and resourcing and general political encouragement to enforce our environmental standards.
Well, we do need to enforce all our regulators appropriately. Certainly, I'd like to see their funding increase, though, you know, it is an immensely difficult time in terms of the pressure on the public finances. Whether they need extra enforcement powers, well, certainly in the water context, I think there is an argument for that. In terms of the natural environment more generally, obviously local authorities are crucial for enforcement of the rules that we already have. And in my experience, it can be very difficult to get them to act. So in those circumstances, I don't think it's lack of enforcement powers. Sometimes I would like to see a more vigorous approach taken to using the powers that councils already have on these areas.
Yes, so you sort of answered the question the way I was going to answer it. I think the principle of the polluter pays is so fundamental. And I'm sorry to say it again, but that is one of the reasons why we were so worried about the nutrient neutrality pullback, because it kind of said it's okay. The fact that it actually said, we are telling you, local authority, that you can ignore that bit. That was a very, very significant shift. And it was no surprise that a week later, the Farmers Weekly were saying, well, hang on, if the developers can have it, then the farmers can have it as well. So principle of polluter pays must not shift. But the second bit is completely, the regulators are just, we can see that they're absolutely hammered. We try to work really constructively with Natural England and the Environment Agency and so on. They don't have enough people on the ground to be able to do the job they want to do. You know, we get frustrated with them, but there's nobody more frustrated than they are themselves. So I have to say, I completely get, again, money is tight, but actually putting the money into them, the actual benefit would be multiplied. More effort put that direction rather than chasing small numbers of people who are making small differences. I think the difference could be huge if we put the right resource in the right place.
Joe, feel free to pick up on the food waste question as well if you've got any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, so I was just going to address the question about greater powers to enforce actions on environmental protection. So I think the role of local nature recovery strategies is going to be really important when it comes to that, because that'll be a great opportunity to bring partners around the table. So obviously you've not just got local authorities, you've got farmers, you've got businesses, you've got all the different tiers of local government, all those different people all working together in partnership to restore nature. So I think that's going to be a really important mechanism to try and hold people to account with that. And one thing that we do in Staffordshire Moorlands is we have a group of farmers called the Churnet Valley Farmers, who are a team of nature-friendly farmers who we're working very closely with to ensure that farmers' voices are heard at the heart of everything we're doing on environmental protections in Staffordshire Moorlands. I think planning is also important. So obviously planning authorities, we've got an important role to play in the rollout of biodiversity net gain, ensuring that developers have that biodiversity net gain enshrined in every single planning application. So obviously they're going to be really important. We need to teach people how to actually use food better. So I think in terms of education, we need to teach our young people how to grow, and the fact that you can actually produce your own fruit on that tree that you can then harvest every autumn, and then you can produce your own jams, chutneys, pies, etc. out of it, and then that's food that you've produced yourself and you've then turned into a meal, a low-cost meal potentially, So I think we've got to educate people far better, on how to use food and how to actually cut the cost of it as well.
Thanks, Joe. And actually, I want to pick up on the points about regulators in the context of the marine environment and whether they've got sufficient teeth to be able to achieve the marine outcomes that we're after.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we see with marine protection is that they're often called paper parks, because we have all the hypotheticals of what we want them to be, but actually we don't have enough regulators out on the boats, on the water, managing them properly. And I completely agree. I think the bylaws are there. The inshore fisheries conservation authorities, the IFCAs, know what they need to be doing, but I don't necessarily think they have the people on the ground out there able to manage our sustainable, make sure there's no overfishing, make sure that there's no dredging. And I think it is something that we and Blue Marine are very aware of and are trying to come up with maybe some solutions. But I think they definitely have the mechanisms and legislation, but whether they have the power behind that or the money behind it, I should probably say.
Great. So I had a sort of couple of final questions just to conclude the panel. The first is, we've talked a lot about how the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. I think the most nature depleted in the G7, which suggests that other countries are doing a better job at looking after some of their wild places and their nature. Are there any lessons that we can learn from other countries that have successfully managed and restored nature that we could potentially apply here in the UK? Anyone have any thoughts on this? Yeah.
Well,
Hilary?
so yeah, I think we often look to the Netherlands as an example of where they're doing some really innovative work. I would also be the first to say that they are doing innovative work, and it doesn't always work. They are learning lessons, but what they are doing is learning fast and making changes as they go. We seem to be much more reticent to try things, to see if it works and then move on. I think you also need to look to the States and actually Canada, who have really learnt over the last, I would say 3-4 decades, how to really think about landscape scale conservation. And again, we're really only, the Lawton principles are only just starting to come into play in the UK, where we're really thinking at scale, accepting that nature doesn't understand boundaries. So even the National Trust, we look after beautiful oases, but actually if we're not working with partners and partners, we won't make the change that we need to. So I think it needs a change of mindset as much as anything else, but other countries are doing this and there is a lot to learn.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Oh, so, keen to get the panelists' views first, sorry. No.
Let me just say that I thought there was only Singapore had a greater number of people per square mile than England. So doesn't that make a bit of difference to how much natural environment there is?
I think the Netherlands is more, has higher population density than the UK. Not sure about that, but anyway, keen to hear other views from what else we can learn from other countries. No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've definitely seen in some of our international projects that Blue Marine do, there's a lot more potential for restoration over there. So we're seeing mangroves and things that actually can sequester carbon being actively restored, like in crazy numbers. And I think they have the climate that there, so they can do these things. But we do have capacity closer to home, and so I think reflecting a bit of the overseas ambition, especially in terms of marine protection, is definitely happening across the world, and that we really need to take some of those lessons and do them here.
Great. Unless anyone else has any thoughts, I'll pose my final question, which is a quick fire round, hopefully, and give you a bit of time to think about it. But I'm asking for one thing that individuals, one thing that councils, and one thing that government can do to restore nature to these wild isles. So have a think. I'm going to come to Aisling first.
Okay, so individual. Well, obviously, I will answer it in a marine context. I think individuals just need to, I suppose, recycle more. Obviously, we would say, plastic is obviously terrible for the ocean, and whilst that's not necessarily my biggest faux pas with ocean management, it's really important. So I think just being aware of what fish you're eating as well. Some types of fish are much more sustainably managed than salmon and tuna. Maybe try and avoid those. Councillors, I think they can try and kind of encourage some local buy-in. We've seen in Plymouth, there's like the National Marine Park that they've kind of self-created, and it's really increased ocean literacy around Plymouth, which has been fantastic, and getting more people to the local area, which is, you want school kids to be wanting to go to their local beaches to have a little play, which is great. And government, I think, just need to put a bit more pressure on in terms of our marine protection. We need to have whole site approach, or else our ecosystems just won't recover.
Great, thank you for going first as well. Theresa.
I would say for individuals, think about buying British when you're in the supermarket, because our food is much more nature friendly than it is from many other parts of the world. If you have a garden, let bits of it grow, allow a bit of space for nature and insects. If you're a local authority, give priority to those local nature recovery strategies. Again, think about leaving some of your parks in a much more natural state, perhaps stop trimming all of those verges as well. And for the government, meet those targets and implement that environmental improvement plan that you've published.
Great, thank you very much. Hilary?
So I would agree with everything everyone has said, but in terms of individuals, play your part, but get other people to play too. Because if you just do something, that's brilliant. But actually imagine if you can get your neighbour and your neighbour and your neighbour to do something too. All of a sudden you've got a mini landscape scale thing going on. So get other people to play. Local authorities, I'm so impressed by the work that's already going on. So more of that, actually. Really local initiatives, getting people to have a sense of pride in place and what they can do that makes a difference in their place. Certainly from our experience, makes a difference. So buying local, supporting local produce, all of those types of things, fantastic. Government, yes, just do what you said you would do, but stay consistent, put the money behind it, and believe that, set that sense of belief and ambition and keep with it.
And Jane.
Thank you. In terms of what local authorities can do, I think councils need to allow every community to have ownership of a green space where they can plant a community orchard, a woodland, build a pond, or create a brand new nature reserve. And that means councils stepping back, letting local people take control of that local area. I think individuals, we should all be building ponds in our gardens. We should all be allowing a little well down in our gardens for wildflowers. And we should all be trying to buy British and buy local where possible. And then finally, I think the government needs to keep treating nature as a top priority, because it matters to all of us in our lives. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jay. So that brings to an end this panel session. I think it's been a really good discussion. We've had lots of practical ideas for what we can do to restore nature. I think we've heard about the scale of the challenge and just how badly depleted our nature is. But we've also heard lots of existing actions that are already happening. And particularly well done to Joe for the work that they've been doing on the Staffordshire Moorlands District Council around nature recovery. Heard about some of the political tensions and some of the competing priorities that need to be reconciled. But hopefully, above all, we've heard some optimism as well that this can be tackled. So huge thanks to our speakers, huge thanks to our sponsors, National Trust, RSPB and WWF. The next event in this room is the Great British Farmers Market, so please come along to that. In half an hour we've got Thérèse Coffey, the Secretary of State, back again to give us some words, and we will have lots of stalls with farmers and learn lots of local produce that you can hear about and find out more about. So please do join us for that. But yeah, just want to say huge thank you again for coming and enjoy the rest of your conference.